All the other acutes leave what they've been doing and ease up close to see what new sort this fellow is. Nobody like him's ever been on the ward before. They're asking him where he's from and what his business is in a way I've never seen them do before to anyone. He says he's a dedicated man. He says he was just a wanderer and logging bum before the army took him and taught him what his natural bent was. Just like they taught some men to gold brick and some men to goof off, he says they taught him to play poker. Since then, he's settled down and devoted himself to gambling on all levels. Just play poker and stay single and live where and how he wants to. People would let him, he says. But you know how society persecutes a dedicated man. Ever since I found my calling, I'd done time in so many small town jails I could write a brochure. They say I'm a habitual hassler. Like I fight some. Shit. They didn't mind so much when I was a dumb logger and got into a hassle. That's excusable, they say. That's a hard-working fellow blowing off some steam, they say. But if you're a gambler, if they know you to get up to some backroom game now and then, all you have to do is split slantwise and you're a goddamn criminal. Hooey! It was breaking up the budget, driving me to and from the pokey for a while there. He shakes his head and puffs out his cheeks. But that was just for a period of time. I learned the ropes. To tell the truth, this assault and battery I was doing in the Pendleton was the first hitch in close to a year. That's why I got busted. I was out of practice. This guy was able to get up off the floor and get to the cops before I left town. Very tough individual. He laughs again and shakes hands and sits down to arm wrestle every time that black boy gets too near him with a thermometer, till he's met everybody on the acute side, and when he finishes shaking hands with the last acute, he comes right over to the chronics, like we aren't no different. You can't tell if he's really this friendly or if he's got some gambler's reason for trying to get acquainted with guys so far gone. A lot of them don't even know what their names are. He's there pulling Ellis's hand off the wall and shaking it just like he was a politician running for something and Ellis's vote was as good as anybody's. Buddy, he says to Ellis in a solemn voice, my name is R.P. McMurphy, and I don't like to see a full-grown man slosh around in his own water. Why don't you go get dried up? Ellis looks down at the puddle around his feet, pure surprise. Why, thank you, he says, and even moves off a few steps toward the latrine before the nails pull his hands back to the wall. McMurphy comes down the line of chronics, shakes hands with Colonel Madison and with Ruckley and old Pete. He shakes the hands of wheelers and walkers and vegetables, shakes hands that he has to pick up out of laps like picking up dead birds, mechanical birds, wonders of tiny bones and wires that have run down and fallen. Shakes hands with everybody he comes to except Big George, the water freak, who grins and shies back from the unsanitary hand. So McMurphy just salutes him and says to his own right hand as he walks away, Hand, how do you suppose that old fellow knew all the evil you've been into? Nobody can make out what he's driving at, or why he's making such a fuss with meeting everybody, but it's better than mixing jigsaw puzzles. He keeps saying it's a necessary thing to get around and meet the men he'll be dealing with, part of a gambler's job. But he must know he ain't going to be dealing with no 80-year-old organic who couldn't do any more with a playing card than put it in his mouth and gum it a while. Yet he looks like he's enjoying himself, like he's the sort of guy that gets a laugh out of people. I'm the last one, still strapped in the chair in the corner. McMurphy stops when he gets to me and hooks his thumbs in his pockets again and leans back to laugh, like he sees something funnier about me than what anyone else sees. All of a sudden, I was scared he was laughing because he knew the way I was sitting there with my knees pulled up and my arms wrapped around them, staring straight ahead as though I couldn't hear a thing, was all just an act. Hoo-wee, he said. Look what we got here. I remember all this part real clear. I remember the way he closed one eye and tipped his head back and looked down across that healing wine-colored scar on his nose, laughing at me. I thought at first that he was laughing because of how funny it looked, an Indian's face, black, oily Indian hair on somebody like me. I thought maybe he was laughing at how weak I looked. But then's when I remember thinking that he was laughing because he wasn't fooled for 1 minute by my deaf and dumb act. Didn't make any difference how cagey the act was. He was on to me and was laughing and winking to let me know it. What's your story, Big Chief? You look like Sitting Bull on a sit-down strike. He looked over to the accused to see if they might laugh about his joke. When they just sniggered, he looked back to me and winked again. What's your name, Chief? Billy Bibbit called out across the room. His name is Bromden. Chief Bromden. Everyone calls him Chief Broom, though, because the aides have him sweeping a large part of the time. There's not much else he can do, I guess. He's deaf. Billy put his chin in his hands. If I was deaf, he sighed, I'd kill myself. McMurphy kept looking at me. He gets his growth, he'll be pretty good size, though, won't he? Wonder how tall he is. I think somebody measured him once at 6'7", but even if he is big, he's scared of his own shadow. Just big deaf Indian. When I saw him sitting here, I thought he looked some Indian, but Brompton ain't an Indian name. What tribe is he? I don't know, Billy said. He was here when I came. I have information from the doctor, Harding said, that he's only half Indian, a Colombian Indian, I believe. That's a defunct Colombian Gorge tribe. The doctor said his father was the tribal leader, hence this fellow's title, Chief. As to the Bromden part of the name, I'm afraid my knowledge in Indian lore doesn't cover that. McMurphy leaned his head down near mine where I had to look at him. Is that right? You deaf, Chief? He's deaf and dumb. McMurphy puckered his lips and looked at my face a long time. Then he straightened back up and stuck his hand out. Well, what the hell? He can shake hands, can't he? Deaf or whatever. By God, Chief, you may be big, but you shake my hand or I'll consider it an insult. And it's not a good idea to insult the new bull goose loony of the hospital, is it? When he said that, he looked back over to Harding and Billy and made a face, but he left that hand out in front of me, big as a dinner plate. I remember real clear the way that hand looked. There was carbon under the fingernails where he'd worked once in a garage. There was an anchor tattooed back from the knuckles. There was a dirty band-aid on the middle knuckle, peeling up at the edge. All the rest of the knuckles were covered with scars and cuts, old and new. I remember the palm was smooth and hard as bone from hefting the wooden handles of axes and hoes. Not the hand you would think would deal cards. The palm was calloused, and the calluses were cracked, and dirt was worked in the cracks. A road map of his travels up and down the west. That palm made a scuffing sound against my hand. I remember the fingers were thick and strong, closing over mine, and my hand commenced to feel peculiar and went swelling up out there on my stick of an arm, like he was transmitting his own blood into it. It rang with blood and power. It blowed up near as big as his, I remember. Mr. McMurray? It's the big nurse. Mr. McMurray, could you come here, please? It's the big nurse. That black boy with the thermometer has gone and got her. She stands there tapping that thermometer against her wrist watch, eyes worrying while she tries to gauge this new man. Her lips are in that triangle shape, like a doll's lips ready for a fake nipple. Aide Williams tells me, Mr. McMurray, that you've been somewhat difficult about your admission shower. Is this true? Please understand, I appreciate the way you've taken it upon yourself to orient with all the other patients on the ward. But everything in its own good time, Mr. McMurray. I'm sorry to interrupt you and Mr. Bromden, but you do understand, everyone must follow the rules. He tips his head back and gives that wink that she isn't fooling him any more than I did, that he's onto her. He looks up at her with one eye for a minute. You know, ma'am, he says, you know, that is the exact thing somebody always tells me about the rules. He grins. They both smile back and forth at each other, sizing each other up. Just when they figure I'm about to do the dead opposite. Then he lets go of my hand.